Wandering into the world of art song for the first time and feeling a little overwhelmed? Don't worry, we got you covered. Hello and welcome back to Meet Mozart. I'm Angie, that's Mozart, and today we are going to give you a guide to appreciating art song. But first, it's our birthday! That's right. Meet Mozart first premiered a year ago, August 2020, in the height of the pandemic, and since then we have kept really busy with trying to dig into some really interesting topics and hear some really great music from the world of classical vocal music. It was my plan to celebrate this milestone by diving into Mozart's very first opera, Apollo and Hyacinth, but things got a tad behind schedule, so keep an eye out for that coming up in October. And if you want to learn more about Mozart's operas, please be sure to hit subscribe, because we're going to be celebrating every major milestone for this channel by presenting you with a different Mozart opera in chronological order. So if you want to get to learn about Magic Flute, you better hit that button. And now on to art song. In a previous video, we talked about what art song is, but if you've never really spent time with the genre, how can you learn to really appreciate it? Well, art song, as we mentioned, is created whenever a composer chooses a pre-existing text. Usually that text is poetry or prose, and they'll take that text and set it to music, usually for classical voice and piano. And the piece is presented in a concert style, which means that it doesn't have all the costumes, props, and staging like an opera would. And those are things that can generally be very helpful for an audience to feel connected with. And so what we have here is a genre that really pares down the experience to text and music. Of course, when getting to know a new art song for the very first time, there really is no right way to do it. But here are a few of our thoughts and tips on how you can get started in your own home. So why not start exactly where the composer did, with the text? Think of a poem that you love, or that has really meant a lot to you, or even something that perhaps you haven't thought about since high school English class, but some bit of it has kind of stuck with you over the years. Then, either using your local library or perhaps some online resources, which we're going to talk to you about in just a second, find a copy of that poem and read through it. Read through it a few times and really take a moment to think about what it means to you. Maybe you think back on what it meant to you when you first read it and meditate a bit on how that's changed. Now, of course, not every poem ever written has been composed into an art song, but if you've chosen something that's relatively popular, there's a pretty good chance that there's some version of a song out there for it. And in order to find it, you're going to hop onto leader.net. This is a phenomenal resource, both for performers and for audiences, because it houses thousands and thousands of song texts. And so you can go through it and find exactly what you're looking for, and it's being constantly updated as new pieces come forth. What's also great about it is that you can search either by composer, by the text, or even just by the poet. And so once you've located your song, then you can go ahead and scroll down, and as you do, you'll see a list of all of the different compositions that have been set to that text, and it will also tell you how they were set. So for example, is it for solo voice and piano, aka art song, or was it set for a choral piece? From there, you can actually search for the song that you want to hear, and you can listen to different composers and how they each set the text. And what's really fabulous about it is that even if you don't see the text in the same way as the composer, first of all, you could potentially get some really great perspective, or if not, even disagreeing is a form of appreciation when it comes to the arts. Now let's talk about how to listen. Since art song only usually uses piano and voice, and it lacks that big orchestral accompaniment that you might find in an opera, and we lose the chance to say, well, there's the trumpet and there's the strings, and sort of organize the piece in that way. At first, the sound can seem very one-dimensional. That is until we get used to really hearing all of the colors and tones that the piano is capable of. So start there. Start with listening just to the tones of the piano. Is it sort of dark and foreboding? Is it bright and cheerful? Is there anxiety and strain? And do those tones shift at different points within the text? And as you listen, ask yourself if you agree. Do you think that it should be set in a dark and foreboding way, or did that particular poem strike you as sort of cheerful? Do you agree with the composer? Then, as you get an overall idea of the color of the piece, then you can start listening for specific figures within the piano. Is there sort of a counter melody going on? Is there perhaps a repetitive figure that reminds you of an element within the poetry, like one that mimics a bird or the rocking of a boat? And with each time you listen, you'll be able to pick up more and more and more of what the composer is trying to convey just through the piano part. Next, bring your attention to the singer and the vocal line. And because of the range and the way that the singer is singing, it might be a little difficult to pick out all of the words if you're not used to hearing that style of singing. So I highly recommend following along with the text. And for this part, you can use a lot of the same tools that you did with the piano. What's the tone and the attitude of the singer? And then you can bring your attention to the melody line and see, is it a very smooth melody that brings you from one note to the next effortlessly? Or is the melody a bit more jagged? Are there big leaps where you're going from low notes to high notes really quickly? Is it sort of all over the place? And if so, why would that be? What in the text would point to either a very fluid melody or a more jagged one? The other interesting thing about listening or watching art song is that, again, even from the performance perspective, it's very different from opera. While the performer is and should be completely entrenched in the emotional attitude of the song, they're going to handle those emotions in a very different way than you would see at an opera. So, for example, even if the piece had a text that was devastatingly sorrowful, the art song performer most likely is not going to drop their knees, beat their chest, raise their hands to the sky in a, oh God, why kind of gesture. Instead, they're just going to be standing still and conveying those emotions. And that's really cool to watch from an audience perspective, because somehow it gives us the space to get to examine the text and those emotions in a very different way. If you think about it, how often in your life are you ever just sad? Never. Even if you're sad, you're usually angry or you're tired or you're frustrated. There's always so much going on. And so in being more subtle, it actually leaves us space to see all of the different complexities of those feelings. It also allows for a slightly blanker canvas. And so we as the audience can sort of paint our own ideas onto the music and onto the text. And because the text is usually poetry, that sort of artistic separation is actually really important. So that's how I suggest finding and listening to art song for the first time. And yes, it is a little bit time consuming, but getting to know a new art form is sort of like visiting a new country for the first time. At first, there's so much to take in that it's really, really overwhelming. But if you allow yourself the opportunity to focus on just one aspect at a time, you begin to really see all of the beautiful nuances and details, and that is what art song is about. Now, I'm not going to leave you without making some recommendations for great composers to start with when you're just getting to know art song. And as always, when we're stepping into something new, I find the best way to do it is to go through something that is already familiar. So in a lot of cases, that's going to mean finding something in your native language, but also looking at composers that have used a lot of folk tunes in their music. So in the English world, that's going to mean composers like Benjamin Britten, George Butterworth, Ralph Vaughan Williams, Aaron Copland, and even Beethoven, who actually set some really great Irish folk tunes. In addition to looking at folk tunes, I would also recommend composers who write really beautiful and memorable melodies. In the English world, again, that's going to mean Florence Price, Roger Quilter, Richard Hunley, and Ellen Mandel. For Spanish song, I highly recommend Fernando Obradors, Manuel de Falla, and Enrique Granados, all of whom actually also used a lot of folk tunes in their melodies. For Italian, we have a lot of the great operatic composers, such as Vincenzo Bellini, Gaetano Donizetti, and Stefano Donaudi. In France, we have Charles Gounod, Pauline Viardot, and even Gabriel Fauré, even though his music might be a little bit more of a stretch, but it's a stretch that's worth it. And finally, we have our German lieder composers, Robert and Clara Schumann, Johannes Brahms, Mozart, and last but most certainly not least, in fact, he is often referred to as the father of art song, Franz Schubert. And if you're feeling like branching out into other languages is a little bit scary, don't worry. Once again, Leader.net has those translations available for you, and so does Oxford Leader, which is another great site that works in a lot of very similar ways. It just doesn't have quite as large of a selection of texts. So that's our guide on how to appreciate art song. Of course, one of our favorite things that you can do is subscribe to this channel, because we always represent songs and we talk about those songs and explain what sort of different musical elements the composer might be using in order to convey the text. And once in a while, we even get to have a composer come on over to visit and actually tell us exactly what they were thinking when they wrote that particular piece. So this is definitely a home for anyone who's wanting to dive into this music for the very first time. Another great thing that you can do is check out the art song organizations that are near you. But more on that another time. All right, guys, that's it. And you know what to do. Please be sure to like, comment, and, tell us what art songs you love, or what song was the one that really made you love the genre. And please be sure to subscribe and just push all of the fun buttons, including that little notification bell, so you don't miss our next video. And we will see you next time.